He was the man all of Seoul feared. One nod from him could end a life. One signature could erase a dynasty. But tonight, in a room full of the most powerful people in Korea, he was brought to his knees by a 4-year-old girl in a yellow dress. If you're here for love, betrayal, and redemption that cuts bone deep, hit like right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay until the very last word. You won't regret it. Bus. The night Kang Ji-hwan walked into the Grand Hyatt Seoul's private banquet hall on the 42nd floor, every person in that room already knew who he was. They knew because they'd been told. They knew because they'd seen what happened to the people who didn't know. The ones who made the mistake of looking too long, or not long enough, or speaking his name in the wrong company. They knew the way animals know a predator is near before it steps into the clearing. Something in the air changes. Something in the chest tightens, and every instinct screams to be very, very still. Ji-hwan was 26 years old. He looked younger than that in photographs, sharper than that in person. He wore a black suit that had been cut for his body specifically, no off-the-rack formality, no borrowed authority. The jacket sat clean across his shoulders. His tie was the color of dried blood. He moved through the entrance the way water moves around stone, not quickly, not slowly, simply with a certainty that the space would accommodate him, because it always had, because everything always did. Behind him, 2 men followed at a distance that was neither too close nor too far, close enough to act, far enough not to crowd. They were not introduced, they were not expected to speak. They scanned the room the way Ji-hwan did not need to, because Ji-hwan already knew everything in it. He'd reviewed the guest list 4 days ago. He'd had the venue swept for surveillance 3 days ago. He'd personally approved every name on the invitation roster, every senator, every industrialist, every rival faction leader who'd been extended the courtesy of his presence tonight. This was not a party. It was a census. It was Ji-hwan's annual exercise in knowing exactly where every significant piece on the board was standing and making sure they all saw him standing above it. The banquet hall stretched the full width of the hotel's east face. Floor-to-ceiling glass on one side gave a view of the Han River lit up beneath a low winter sky. The kind of view that made men feel powerful, which was exactly why Ji-hwan had chosen the venue. Men who feel powerful are easier to read. They talk more. They posture more. They reveal more about what they want and what they're afraid of losing. 53 guests, 14 factions, 7 government contacts, 3 international observers he hadn't yet decided what to do with. He moved through them like a blade through silk. Senator Park found him near the bar and spent 6 minutes discussing infrastructure legislation that Ji-hwan knew was actually about a construction tender in Busan that Ji-hwan's people already controlled the outcome of. He listened with the patience of someone who has never once needed to pretend to be interested, but understood the value of letting other people feel heard. He nodded twice. He said 4 words. Senator Park walked away satisfied, which meant Senator Park would sleep badly for the next week, trying to figure out if he'd been played. He had been. Choi Byung-soo, head of the Choi Trading Network, and a man who owed Ji-hwan 3 separate favors accumulated across 3 separate crises, materialized at his elbow somewhere between the first and second course and began talking about shipments. Ji-hwan stopped him with a single look. Not hostile, not warm, just the specific blankness that meant this conversation happens in my office, not here. And Choi retreated without protest. The evening moved the way Ji-hwan had designed it to move. Controlled. Measured. Every interaction a transaction. Every smile a contract clause. He was standing near the eastern window with a glass of water. He didn't drink at public functions, hadn't in 2 years, watching the river below and half listening to a property developer explain why the Northern District rezoning would benefit everyone when the noise of the room changed. It was subtle. Not a gasp, not a shout, just a pocket of silence that opened up somewhere near the main entrance and spread outward through the crowd the way a bruise spreads through skin. Slowly, then all at once. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The property developer lost his thread mid-sentence, and his eyes drifted past Ji-hwan's shoulder. Ji-hwan turned. The girl was small enough that most of the adults nearest the entrance hadn't seen her immediately. She'd slipped through the gap between 2 bodyguards stationed at the door, both of whom would be spoken to very seriously tomorrow. And now she stood inside the hall, perfectly still, in the way that only very young children and very dangerous animals can stand, completely without self-consciousness, with a focus so total it made everything around her recede. She was 4 years old, maybe, small-boned and upright. She wore a yellow dress with a white sash and white patent leather shoes, and her hair was done in dozens of tiny braids threaded through with white beads that caught the light when she moved. Her skin was deep brown, warm and even, and her eyes, when they found him, when they locked onto him from across 60 feet of marble floor and candlelight and Korea's most powerful people. Her eyes were the particular dark brown that catches light from inside that seems to generate its own low, steady glow. She looked at Ji-hwan the way she had already decided, the way someone looks at a destination they have been walking toward for a very long time and have finally arrived at. She raised one small arm. She pointed directly at him. Her voice, when it came, was clear and high and entirely without hesitation. "Dad, I found you." The room went silent. Not the polite silence of formal occasions. Not the careful silence of people who have been trained to read a room. The raw, involuntary silence of 53 people whose brains had just received information they had no framework to process. Senators and crime lords and billionaire industrialists all doing the same thing simultaneously, stopping, staring, waiting. Ji-hwan did not move. He was very good at not moving. He had trained himself to it the way other men trained themselves to shoot or fight. Not as an absence of reaction, but as a controlled override of it, a deliberate rerouting of what the body wants to do in favor of what the situation requires. In 2 years as head of the Kang Syndicate, he had been shot at twice, threatened with exposure 4 times, and survived one assassination attempt that had left a scar along his left ribs he still felt when the weather turned cold. None of those moments had required more control than this one, because the girl was still pointing at him. And her face, her small, serious, certain face, held the expression of someone who had been searching and had not stopped searching and had found what she was looking for and was not surprised by it at all. He became aware, in the periphery of his vision, of movement near the entrance. Someone pushing through the crowd, moving fast, breathing hard. Nia Okafor had been a housemaid at the Grand Hyatt for 11 months. She was 29 years old, originally from Lagos by way of a childhood in 3 countries and an adulthood in 2 more. She was not a small woman, tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who had learned early that the world did not automatically make room for her and had decided to occupy space regardless. But right now she moved like someone who was trying very hard to become invisible, which was not working, which she clearly knew, which was making everything worse. She reached the girl in 7 seconds. She crouched down and wrapped both arms around the small body. And the girl, Amina, Ji-hwan would learn this name in approximately 14 minutes, would spend the next 40 years saying it, did not flinch, did not struggle, but also did not drop her arm. Still pointing, still looking at him. Amina. Nia's voice was barely above a whisper, but the silence in the room made it carry. Amina, baby, we have to go, right now. We have to go right now. But I found him, the girl said, calm, factual, as though this were a simple matter of logistics that was being unnecessarily complicated by the adults. I found Dad. Ji-hwan watched Nia Okafor's face. He watched it the way he watched everything, cataloging, cross-referencing, filing. He saw the terror there, which he expected, because a woman who had somehow allowed her child to wander into a crime boss's private function would be terrified by simple instinct. But underneath the terror was something else, something older and more complicated. The specific expression of someone who has been living in proximity to a secret for so long that the secret has started to feel like weather. Always there, always dangerous, temporarily manageable until it isn't. The specific expression of someone whose worst nightmare has just become public record. He had never seen this woman before in his life. He was certain of this. He was also noticing, with a precision that he did not want and could not turn off, that the girl's jaw had a particular set to it, the way she held her chin, the exact angle. He had seen this angle before. He saw it every morning in the bathroom mirror when he was brushing his teeth. He set his water glass down on a nearby table. He straightened his cuffs. He walked toward the entrance. The crowd parted for him because the crowd always parted for him. But this time there was something additional in the parting. A collective held breath. A room full of powerful people all understanding simultaneously that they were witnessing something they would be discussing for years. He stopped in front of the woman and the child. Up close, Nia Okafor was trying not to shake and mostly succeeding. Her jaw was set. Her eyes met his directly, which he noted, because most people in her position would have looked at the floor. She met his eyes, and in her eyes he saw the terror and the shame, and underneath both of those, buried the deepest but still visible if you knew what to look for, something that looked like relief, like the exhale at the end of a very long sprint. He looked down at the girl. The girl looked up at him. "Hi," she said. He said nothing for a long moment. "Who are you?" he asked. He directed the question at Nia. His voice was very quiet, very level. The kind of voice that carries more danger in its stillness than volume ever could. Nia opened her mouth, closed it. He watched her throat move as she swallowed. "My name is Nia Okafor. I work here. I'm so sorry. I don't know how she got away from me. I was in the staff corridor, and she stopped, swallowed again. Her name is Amina. She's my daughter." "I know who she is," the girl said helpfully, pointing at Ji-hwan again. "He's my dad." Several people behind Ji-hwan shifted. He heard the specific sound of someone's champagne glass being set down very carefully. "We'll speak," Ji-hwan said to Nia. Not a request, not a threat. A statement of future fact, delivered with the same certainty he'd used to describe a weather pattern. "Not here. Later tonight." Nia looked like she wanted to argue, like she had about 14 things she needed to say and exactly no safe place to say any of them. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Ji-hwan looked at this girl one more time. She was watching him with those light-catching eyes, her chin at that particular angle, completely unconcerned by the room full of Korea's power structure staring at her. "Okay," she said, as if she'd been waiting for him to catch up and was prepared to be patient about it. He turned back to the room, 53 faces looking at him. He let the silence hold for 3 full seconds, long enough for everyone to understand that whatever had just happened, he was not rattled by it. He was never rattled. This was simply one more development in an evening he remained completely in control of. And then he returned to his position near the window, picked up his water glass, and the property developer, reading the room with impressive speed, resumed his sentence about Northern District rezoning exactly where he'd left off. The banquet continued, but nothing in it was the same. The staff corridors of the Grand Hyatt's 42nd floor were narrow and fluorescent lit and smelled of industrial cleaning solution and the ghost of 100 service carts. Nia stood in one of them at 11:47 p.m. with Amina asleep against her shoulder. The girl had crashed hard and fast the way children do, her body simply switching off when it had had enough, her small fists still loosely curled in the fabric of Nia's uniform jacket, and waited. She had put Amina down in the staff break room on a narrow couch with her own jacket folded under her head. She had kissed her daughter's forehead and stood over her for longer than she needed to. Then she had come back to the corridor to wait because she had no other choice, because she had known from the moment Amina pointed across that room that waiting was the only thing left to do. She'd been running for 4 years. She was done running. She could feel it in her body. Not relief exactly, or not only relief. Also the specific bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been sprinting and has finally stopped and is now facing the thing they were sprinting from. She heard him coming before she saw him. Not his footsteps. He moved quietly for a man his size, but the slight change in air pressure that preceded him, the almost imperceptible shift that she had not noticed consciously 5 years ago, but apparently her body remembered. Ji-hwan came around the corner alone. No bodyguards. She noted this. She didn't know what it meant. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her in the banquet hall. That cataloging gaze. That total attention. And she made herself hold it, made herself stand straight, made herself be the woman she had spent 4 years becoming instead of the terrified 24-year-old who had packed 2 bags and fled a country on someone else's advice. "Talk," he said. "I don't know where to start." "Start with her." Nia breathed in, breathed out. "Her name is Amina. She's 4 years old. She turned 4 in August." She paused. "She's yours." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere far below them, the city moved and breathed and went about its business without any awareness of this hallway, this moment, this specific weight settling into the air between two people. Jihuan said nothing. "I know what you're thinking," Nia said. "You don't. I know you have questions. I know how this looks. And I'm not going to pretend I have a good excuse because I don't think what I did was right. I have never thought—" Her voice cracked slightly. She steadied it. "I made choices that I thought were protecting her. I was wrong about some of them. I've known that for a long time. You left." His voice was still level, still very quiet. "5 years ago, we were—" He stopped. Something moved across his face and was gone. "You left without telling me anything." "Yes. I looked for you." The words landed in her chest like stones. "I know," she said. "I was told you were dead." His jaw worked slightly. "I was told there was a car accident in Incheon. I was told—" He stopped again. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way she couldn't fully name, stripped of something, down to something else underneath. "I went to a funeral. I stood at a grave." Nia felt the blood leave her face. "What?" "6 months after you disappeared, someone informed my people that Nia Okafor, Nigerian national, 25 years old, had died in a traffic accident in Incheon." His eyes were very still. "There is a grave. I went. I stood there for 40 minutes in the rain." The corridor swam slightly. Nia put one hand against the wall. She had known someone had intervened. She had suspected in the years since that the woman who had come to her, the elegant woman with the soft voice who had laid out the reasons, the evidence, the argument for why leaving was the only safe choice, that this woman had done more than she'd admitted. She had suspected, but she had not let herself investigate, because investigating meant acknowledging the full shape of what she'd walked into, and the full shape was too large to look at directly. A grave. Someone had built a grave. "I didn't know that," Nia said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "I didn't know about the grave. I swear to you." "Then tell me what you do know." So she told him. She told him about the night 5 years ago, 3 months after they'd ended, or she'd thought they'd ended, or it had ended in the complicated way things end between people who aren't ready to name what they are. She told him about the morning she'd taken a pregnancy test in the bathroom of her apartment in Mapogu and sat on the cold tile floor for 2 hours afterward. She told him about the woman who had come to her apartment 11 days later. Elegant, perhaps 60. Silver hair pulled back severely, a way of occupying space that reminded Nia of Jihuan himself, the same certainty that the room would accommodate her. The woman had known about the pregnancy. The woman had known things about Nia that Nia had not told anyone. The woman had been calm and specific and had spent 2 hours explaining, with documentation, why Jihuan's criminal world made him an impossible father, a lethal risk, a future that would consume both Nia and any child born to her. "She showed me files," Nia said, "photographs, police reports, reports of people who'd crossed him, before he was who he is now, before he took over, but still—" She pressed her hand harder against the wall. "I was 24 years old. I was pregnant, and I was scared, and she made it seem so clear, like leaving was the only sane choice." Who was this woman? Not a question, a demand. Nia looked at him. She had not said the name aloud to anyone. She had carried it for 4 years in the locked box inside her chest where she kept the things too dangerous to speak. And she opened that box now and took the name out and set it in the fluorescent light between them. "She never told me her name," Nia said. "But she had a photograph on her phone. When she was showing me the files, I saw it. A photo of her with you, a formal photograph. The two of you at some event." Jihuan was very still. "She looked at least 30 years older than you," Nia continued. "She held herself exactly the way you hold yourself. I remember thinking that." She paused. "And she called you Jihuan, not Mr. Kang, not formally. She said your name the way someone says a name they've been saying their whole life." The quality of Jihuan's stillness changed. It was a small change. If you didn't know how to read him, and Nia had spent 3 months 5 years ago learning, in the particular intensive way you learn someone you are falling in love with without meaning to, you wouldn't catch it. But she caught it. A barely perceptible tightening around the eyes. a fractional shift in his jaw. He knew who she was describing. She watched him know it. She watched the knowledge move through him like a current, watched him process it and file it and lock it away behind that composure that was so total it seemed structural, seemed like something load-bearing. "How did you end up here?" he said finally. "In this hotel. Working in this hotel." This was the question Nia had been dreading more than any other, because this was the question whose answer she didn't have, and the absence of an answer was the part that had kept her awake in the small hours for months. "I was placed here," she said, "a staffing agency, 8 months ago. Very good offer, better than anything I'd found in 2 years, and I needed the money and I needed the stability for Amina." She paused. "I took the job. 6 weeks later, I found out this hotel hosts a Kang syndicate function every year. By that point, I'd already signed a year contract. I thought about leaving. I planned to. I had everything ready, but every time I was about to go, something happened. Amina got sick. The contract had penalties. There was always a reason to wait 1 more week." She stopped. "I think the reasons were manufactured. I think I was kept here deliberately." "Well, see..." Jihuan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't parse. "Someone placed you in this hotel," he said, "knowing the function was tonight." "Yes. The same person who sent you away 5 years ago." "That's what I think, yes." "And tonight, Amina got into this room somehow." Nia closed her eyes briefly. "She's been asking about her father for about 6 months. I've been honest with her in the way you can be honest with a 4-year-old. I've told her father is a very important man and that we would find him someday. She must have heard the name. She must have heard the staff talking." She opened her eyes. "She's 4, but she remembers everything. She's been asking what he looks like. I showed her a photograph once. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have, but she was crying so hard and I..." Her voice cracked again. This time she didn't bother to steady it. She remembered the photograph. She saw you from across the room and she just knew. Jihuan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Nia began to feel the specific particular terror of someone who has told the truth and cannot know yet if the truth was the right thing to tell. "I want to see her," he said. The words were very simple. He said them the way he said most things, without decoration, without the rhetorical framework most people wrap around the things they actually want. Just the fact of it, placed in the air between them. "I want to see her." "She's sleeping," Nia said. "I'm not asking you to wake her." Nia looked at him for a moment. Then she pushed off the wall and led him down the corridor toward the break room. The break room was small and badly lit and smelled of instant ramen and the particular exhaustion of people who work service jobs on their feet for 12 hours at a stretch. Amina was asleep on the narrow couch exactly as Nia had left her, her braids spread across the folded jacket, her small chest rising and falling with the absolute conviction of a child's deep sleep. Jihuan stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Nia stood slightly behind him and watched him look at his daughter and tried to read what was happening in the set of his shoulders, the line of his back, because his face was in profile and mostly in shadow, and she couldn't see his expression. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely still. The fingers of his right hand moved slightly at his side, not trembling, not quite, but moving, like a current passing through. Amina shifted in her sleep and made a small sound, some private objection to some dream event, and her fist tightened and then relaxed, and Jihuan moved slightly, reflexively, not toward her but in her direction, and caught himself and stopped. He stood there for another minute, 2 minutes. Then he turned and walked back into the corridor, and Nia followed, and he stood with his back against the wall and his eyes on the middle distance and said nothing for a long time. "I have to get back to my guests," he said finally. "I know. But this conversation isn't over." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You're staying in the hotel housing?" "Yes, there's a staff accommodation block on the 14th floor." "Don't leave, either of you." Nia felt the hairs on her arms rise slightly. Is that a threat?" Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. "It's a request," he said. "Presented without the politeness because right now I don't have the patience for it." She nodded. He straightened his jacket. He looked, for one moment, like a man who was 26 years old and had just been handed something enormous and was alone with the weight of it, just for that 1 second before the composure closed back over him like water over a stone. Then he walked back toward the banquet. Nia did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in the staff accommodation room with Amina warm against her side and stared at the ceiling and thought about graves. She had always known the woman who'd come to her apartment had not been acting alone. She'd known the persuasion was too precise, the documentation too complete, the timing too perfect for it to be one person acting on their own conscience. She'd known there was architecture underneath it, structure, planning, deliberate design. She had not let herself ask who designed it, because some questions, once asked, could not be unasked. But now she thought about a grave. She thought about Ji Huan standing in the rain over a grave with her name on it. She thought about a woman with silver hair who held herself like someone accustomed to occupying space, who said Ji Huan's name like someone who had been saying it for a very long time, who had appeared in Nia's apartment knowing everything, the pregnancy, the relationship, the precise vulnerabilities of a 24-year-old alone in a foreign country carrying an unplanned child. She thought about how she had ended up in this specific hotel. She thought about how easily Amina had gotten through those doors. She thought, this isn't an accident. None of this is an accident. She thought, someone put me in this room tonight on purpose. And she thought, if that's true, if someone engineered this specific collision, this specific exposure, then the question is not how or why. The question is what happens next. 3 floors above her, Ji Huan Kong sat alone in the suite the hotel kept permanently reserved for his use and did not sleep either. His jacket was folded over the back of a chair. His tie was loose. He was sitting at the desk with his phone face down in front of him and his hands flat on the table on either side of it, and he was not moving. He was thinking about a set of brown eyes that caught light from inside. He was thinking about a chin held at a particular angle. He was thinking about a woman with silver hair and the way his mother had looked at him across the banquet hall tonight. Brief, controlled, assessing, after the girl had pointed at him. The way Madame Kang Hairin had looked at him in the specific way she always looked at him when something had happened that she already knew about. He turned his phone over. He opened his contacts. He scrolled to a name. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the phone and set it back down and sat in the silence and thought about a grave in Incheon and a woman who had told him 5 years ago, with a composure that had seemed like grief at the time, that Nia Okafor was dead. He thought about who had told him. He thought about what it meant that the telling and the lying and the grave and the placement and this entire night might all point back to the same source. He thought about what it meant that the source was the person who had raised him, the person who ran the syndicate alongside him, the person whose voice was the first one he had heard, and whose name, Hierin, Mother, Iyama, sat at the center of every story he told himself about who he was and where he came from. He thought about a 4-year-old girl asleep on a narrow couch with white beads in her braids. He thought, I have to know. He thought, I already know. He thought, tomorrow everything changes and nothing will be the same, and I am not ready, and none of that matters. Outside the window, Seoul blazed against the winter dark. Millions of lights, millions of lives. A city that did not know and did not care that somewhere on the 42nd floor of a glass tower, a man who had built his entire existence on the principle that he controlled everything had just discovered there was something he had never controlled at all. His daughter was 3 floors below him. He had not known she existed this morning. He would not make the same mistake twice. At 7 a.m., a knock came at Nia's door. She was already awake. She had been awake for hours. She opened the door and found not Ji Huan, but one of his men, young, broad-shouldered, with the particular blank professional courtesy of someone who has been trained to complete tasks without affecting them, who handed her an envelope and waited. Inside the envelope was a single card. On it, in handwriting she didn't recognize but somehow knew was his, tight, controlled, slanting slightly left, 3 words. Breakfast, 8 o'clock. And below that, a room number. Nia looked at the card for a long time. She looked at the man in the doorway. She looked back at the card. She thought about running. She thought about what running had cost her. She thought about her daughter, who was currently in the bathroom brushing her teeth with the focused determination she brought to every task, humming something tunelessly, completely unaware and entirely at peace. Nia put the card in her pocket. "Tell him we'll be there," she said. The man nodded and left without a word. In the bathroom, Amina appeared in the doorway with toothpaste on her chin and her eyes still soft with sleep, and she looked at Nia the way she sometimes looked at her, that direct, uncomplicated gaze that saw everything, and said, "Are we going to see my dad today?" Nia crouched down and wiped the toothpaste from her daughter's chin and held her face in both hands. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We are." Amina nodded like this was exactly what she'd expected, turned around, and went back to brushing her teeth. And somewhere above them, in a room with a view of the river, Kang Ji-hwan was on the phone, voice low, words precise, beginning to pull at the first thread of something that had been woven around him for years. He didn't know yet how deep it went. He didn't know yet what he was going to find at the center of it. But he knew, with the particular cold certainty that had guided him through every crisis of his adult life, that he was going to find it, and that whoever had built this, whoever had taken a woman from him, taken a daughter from him, built a grave and staffed a hotel, and moved people like pieces across a board, was going to wish, very deeply, that they had chosen differently. The phone line connected. He heard breathing on the other end. "Mother," he said, "we need to talk." The phone line connected on the second ring. That was the first thing wrong. Madame Kang Hye-rin never answered on the second ring. She answered when she was ready and not before, which was usually the fourth or fifth, because she understood the power of making people wait and had practiced it for so long it had become instinct. Second ring meant she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand. Second ring meant she'd been expecting the call. Ji-hwan. Her voice was exactly what it always was, measured, warm in the way that expensive things are warm, precise in the way that surgical instruments are precise. "It's early. I know what time it is." A brief pause, not a surprised pause, a calculating one. "You sound tired. Did the function run late?" He looked at the window. The Han River was gray in the early morning light, flat and wide and cold. "I need to see you today." "Of course. I'm having lunch with the Shin family at 1, but I can move, not lunch, this morning, before 8. Another pause, longer this time. "Ji-hwan, is something before 8, Mother?" He kept his voice level. He had spent the last 2 hours in the particular cold internal space he went to when emotion was a liability. Somewhere behind his sternum, quiet and windless, where he could think without the thinking being contaminated by what he felt. "Come to the hotel. Use the private entrance." He ended the call before she could answer. He set the phone down and sat in the silence and breathed, and did not think about a grave in Incheon, and did not think about the rain, and did not think about 40 minutes he had spent standing in front of a headstone with her name on it, because if he thought about those things right now, he would not be functional, and he needed to be functional. He thought instead about the breakfast meeting at 8. He thought about Amina's face and the specific geometry of her jaw. He thought about the evidence chain, the placement, the staffing agency, the hotel contract, the unlocked door through which a 4-year-old had walked into a room full of criminals. He thought about what each link in that chain implied and what the complete chain assembled pointed toward. He was methodical. He had always been methodical. It was the thing his mother had praised most in him when he was a boy. And the irony of using her own lesson against her sat in his chest like a coal, not burning yet, just hot, just waiting. Yerin arrived at 6:52. She came the way she always came to private meetings, alone, or apparently alone, which meant her 2 personal security detail were positioned outside, and her assistant was in the lobby, and she herself was the only one who would walk through the door, because Hye-rin had always understood that the appearance of vulnerability was its own kind of power. She was 61 years old and looked 50 in good light, and looked ageless in the particular way of women who have decided aging is not something that happens to them. Her silver hair was pulled back. She wore a charcoal wool coat with a high collar and moved through the hotel suite's entrance with the proprietary ease of someone who had approved the lease. She stopped when she saw Ji-hwan's face. He was standing in the center of the room. Not sitting, not positioned near the window or the desk in the studied way he sometimes positioned himself for conversations he needed to control. Just standing, in the middle of the room, in yesterday's shirt with his jacket gone, and his tie removed, and the particular stillness of someone who has been very still for a very long time. She read him the way she always read him, quickly, thoroughly, with the unsentimental precision of a woman who had spent 26 years studying this particular face. Whatever she saw, she decided to go around it. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, and began taking off her coat. "Tell me what happened at the function. I heard there was some kind of disturbance near the—" "Don't!" She stopped with her coat half off. "Don't manage this," he said. "Not right now." She looked at him for a moment. Then she finished taking off her coat and laid it over the arm of a chair with the careful precision she brought to every physical action, and she turned to face him fully, and her expression shifted into something older and more direct. "All right," she said. "Tell me." Nia Okafor is alive. Not a flicker. Not a tremor. Nothing moved in her face except her eyes, which moved very slightly. Not with surprise, but with something she was deciding how to calibrate. "Jihuan. She's in this hotel. She's been working here for 11 months, and..." He watched his mother's face with everything he had. "Her daughter came into the banquet hall last night and pointed at me in front of 53 witnesses." Hierin was quiet. "Her daughter," Jihuan said, "who is 4 years old, who was conceived 5 years ago. When Nia and I were..." He stopped, chose the next word with care. "When Nia and I were together." The silence between them had texture now. It had weight. "I see," Hierin said. "Do you?" She moved to the chair near the window and sat in it the way she sat in everything. Exactly, as if the furniture had been placed specifically for her. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at her son with an expression that he had spent his entire life interpreting as love, and was now, standing here in the gray morning light with the facts assembling themselves in his chest, re-examining. "What did the woman tell you?" Hierin asked. "Her name is Nia. Use her name." A very small pause. "What did Nia tell you?" "That a woman came to her apartment 5 years ago, showed her documentation, convinced her that my world made me an impossible father and a mortal risk to her and the child." He watched her hands. They were still. "Told her to leave. Arranged her departure. People make choices, Jihuan. She chose to..." She was 24 years old and pregnant and alone in a country that wasn't hers, and someone who knew everything about her showed up with a file and told her what to do. His voice stayed level. He needed it to stay level. Whoever that was knew about the pregnancy before Nia had told anyone, before she'd told me, before she'd told anyone. Hierin said nothing. "And then 6 months later," Jihuan continued, "someone told my people she was dead. Produced documentation, a death certificate, an accident report." The coal in his chest was hotter now. Someone built a grave. The room was very quiet. Outside, Seoul was waking up. Delivery trucks and early commuters and the city grinding back into its daily motion, completely indifferent. "You went to that grave," Jihuan said. "You came with me. You stood next to me for 40 minutes in the rain and you watched me." His jaw tightened. He felt it tighten and did not try to stop it. "You watched me mourn her." Hierin's hands, still folded in her lap, adjusted slightly, a minimal motion, like a small thing resettling its weight. "Jihuan," she said. Her voice was very gentle. "You were 21. You were about to take on leadership of the syndicate. You were in the most dangerous period of your career and you were distracted. The girl was a liability, a foreign national, no ties to the organization, no understanding of the world you operate in. Stop." The word came out quiet and absolute. "Stop talking." She stopped. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and they were exactly what they had always been, mother and son. The two people who had built something together, the two people who had survived together, and also now, something else, something that did not have a name yet, but that both of them could feel shaping itself in the air between them. "Did you do it?" he said. Not loud, not threatening, just the question, stripped of everything, placed between them like an object on a table. Hierin met his eyes. "I protected you," she said. "The way I have always protected you. The way I protected this family and this organization before you were old enough to do it yourself." That's not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. He stepped back. He needed distance. He put 6 feet of floor between them and turned toward the window and stood there with his back to her. and looked at the river and breathed and breathed and breathed. "I have a daughter," he said to the glass. Hierin said nothing. "I have a daughter who is 4 years old, and I have never known her, and she has never known me, and 4 years of her life have already happened without me, and that will never—" He stopped. His hands were pressed flat against the window frame. He could feel the cold coming through the glass. "That is done. That time is gone. And you watched me stand at a grave. The child is— The existence of a child changes nothing about the fundamental—" He turned around. She stopped speaking. She had seen him angry before. She had seen him controlled and tactical and cold, in the way he was cold when he was deciding someone's fate. She had not seen this. This was something underneath the anger, something that anger was simply the most available word for. The specific devastation of a man who has discovered that the architecture of his grief was constructed by someone he loved. "Get out," he said. "Ji-Hwan, I have a meeting at 8. Get out of this hotel before then. Don't contact me today." He turned back to the window. "And don't go near her. Don't go near either of them. If I find out you've been within 50 meters of Nia or Amina—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The silence stretched. He heard his mother stand. He heard her pick up her coat. He heard her footsteps cross the room toward the door, measured and even, because Hierin did not let herself be seen hurrying away from anything. At the door, she paused. "You think you understand what I did," she said. "You think it's simple. You'll learn eventually that it isn't." He said nothing. The door opened and closed. He stood at the window for a long time after that, and the river was gray and flat and cold, and the coal in his chest burned steadily, and he thought about everything he knew and everything he still needed to know, and the gap between those two things, which was large and dark and full of things he could not yet see. At 8 o'clock precisely, he knocked on the door of Nia's room. She opened it immediately, which meant she'd been standing near it, which meant she'd been ready, which meant whatever she'd expected this morning, she'd decided to face it standing up. He noted this. He noted most things about her, he was realizing. That's the way she held herself, the way her eyes moved, the way she processed information visibly in the set of her jaw. She was not a woman who hid easily. He wasn't sure how she'd survived 4 years of hiding. Amina was behind her, pressed against her mother's leg, looking at Ji-Hwan with the same direct, uncomplicated attention she'd leveled at him across the banquet hall. In daylight, she was more vivid. Her braids were slightly disordered from sleep, and one of her white beads had slid down lower than the others, and she was wearing a yellow sweater over orange leggings that did not match, and she looked, Ji-Hwan thought, she looked exactly like someone who should exist in the world and who he should have known about for 4 years. He crouched down to her eye level. This was not a calculated move. He didn't plan it. His knees just bent and he was down there, looking at her from 3 feet away instead of several, and she looked back at him with those eyes that held light from inside and said nothing, which he found he respected. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "Your name is Amina." "Yes." A pause. "What's your name?" He had not expected this. She had called him Dad across a crowded room the night before with zero hesitation, and now she was asking his name. And he couldn't tell if this was 4-year-old logic or some kind of test or simply the way she moved through the world, on her own terms, at her own pace, gathering information as needed. "Ji-Hwan," he said. She tried it. "Ji-Hwan." Close enough. She considered him for another moment. Then she turned and went back into the room and picked up something from the bed. A small stuffed elephant, gray, extremely worn, and came back and held it up for his inspection. "This is Pepper," she said. "Pepper," he repeated. "She's scared of loud rooms. She didn't sleep good last night." Ji-Hwan looked at the elephant. He looked at the girl. "I'll keep the noise down," he said. Amina nodded, satisfied, and retreated back to the bed with her elephant. He straightened up. Nia was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something careful and raw at the edges, like a place that's been hurt and is watching for the next impact. "Breakfast," he said. She nodded and picked up Amina's jacket. He had arranged a private dining room 2 floors up. No staff present during the meal itself. Food laid out on a sideboard, door closed. Just the 3 of them, which felt both enormous and insufficient for what needed to be discussed. Amina ate scrambled eggs with remarkable focus and occasional observations about Pepper's opinions on the food. Jihuan and Nia sat across from each other with coffee and the specific careful posture of people who have things to say and are calculating the order. "I spoke to my mother this morning," Jihuan said. Nia's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down. "She didn't deny it," he said. "She called it protection." Nia was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean for us? For me and Amina?" "It means I know where the threat came from. It means I can start tracing the full structure of what she built." He watched her face. "It also means that until I understand the full scope of it, you're not safe outside this building. My mother doesn't do things halfway. If she placed you here deliberately, she did. Then there's a reason that extends beyond last night's function. She wanted this collision. I don't know yet what she expected to happen after it." Nia pressed her fingers to the table. Her nails were short, clean, no polish. Her hands were steady, but he could see the effort that steadiness was costing her. "You think she's still running something?" "I think she's been running something for 5 years, and last night was a move in a game I haven't fully mapped yet." He paused. "I also think she's been watching Amina." The color shifted in Nia's face, not draining away. Something colder than that. "What do you mean watching?" "I mean that my mother doesn't act from sentiment. She didn't monitor your location and engineer your placement in this hotel because she regretted what she did. She did it because she had a use for you, for the situation, for..." He glanced at Amina, who was now feeding a piece of egg to Pepper with solemn concentration. He lowered his voice. "For the child." Nia's jaw tightened. "She is not going anywhere near my daughter." "No," Jihuan said. "She isn't." The word was simple and flat and carried the specific gravity of a man who has made a decision that has already become fact. Nia looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. The distance between them was too large and too old for trust to cross in a morning. But something adjacent. The recognition of an ally, maybe. The recognition of someone who is facing the same direction. "I need you to tell me everything," he said. "Not the summary. Everything. The woman who came to your apartment. Describe her in detail. What she wore, how she spoke, everything she showed you, every word. I need the staffing agency name, the contract terms, who contacted you first. I need the timeline of everything that felt off in the 11 months since you arrived here." Nia looked at him steadily. "That's going to take a while." "I'm aware. And while we're doing that," she glanced at Amina, "what happens to her? She can't just sit in a hotel room." "I have a house," he said, "in Hanam Dong, secure, staff I trust." He paused. "I'd like you to consider moving there, both of you." The silence that followed had layers. "You want us to move into your house," Nia said. "I want my daughter in a location I can guarantee the security of." "And me?" He met her eyes. "I'm not separating you. I'm not that person." A beat. "And I need your cooperation to dismantle what my mother built. That's easier if you're somewhere I can reach you." Nia was quiet for a long moment. Amina had finished her eggs and was now attempting to make Pepper sit upright against a water glass, with the focused engineering determination of a small person who has decided something will work and will keep trying until it does. "I spent 4 years making decisions based on someone else's information about what was safe," Nia said finally. "I'm not doing that again." She looked at him. "If we move into your house, I need to understand exactly what that means. What it looks like day to day. What you're asking from me. I'm asking you to let me protect my daughter." "She has been protected," Nia said, and her voice was level, but underneath the level something caught and held. "I have protected her for 4 years alone. I need you to understand that before we go any further." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. 2 words. No decoration. Nia breathed in slowly, looked at her daughter, looked back at him. "Okay," she said, "we'll move." Isam. They left the hotel at noon. Jihuan's car, blacked out, armored, 2 follow vehicles, waited in the underground garage. Amina walked between them through the lobby and held her elephant against her chest and looked around at everything with the thorough interest of a person for whom the world is still new enough to be genuinely astonishing. She stopped to examine a large floral arrangement near the elevator bank, and pointed out that the yellow flowers were the best ones, which Ji Huan filed away without entirely knowing why. In the car, she sat in the middle of the back seat and fell asleep within 6 minutes, her head tipping sideways until it came to rest against Ji Huan's arm. He went still when it happened. He felt her head against his sleeve and went completely, carefully still, the way he'd gone still the night before, and stared straight ahead and breathed. Nia was looking out the window on the other side. He could see her reflection in the glass, her profile, the set of her jaw, the slight movement of her throat as she swallowed. She looked like someone doing math in her head, calculating and recalculating, running numbers on something that kept coming out different than she expected. "She always does this," Nia said quietly, without turning from the window. "Falls asleep in cars. Since she was a baby." "She's comfortable," Ji Huan said. Nia turned then, looked at him, looking at Amina. Something moved across her face that she didn't bother to conceal, and then did bother to conceal. A half-second later, too late. They rode the rest of the way in silence, with Seoul moving past the windows and the child asleep between them. The house in Hanam-dong was not what Nia had expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Something cold, maybe. All clean lines and expensive surfaces and the specific personality-less perfection of a space maintained by staff and never actually lived in. What she found was something that had the bones of a cold house. High ceilings, minimal furniture, gray stone floors, but was inhabited in a way she hadn't anticipated. There were books, not decorative books. Books that had been read, spines cracked, some lying open face down on tables. A mug on the kitchen counter that someone had forgotten to put away. A window in the main room with a view of a garden that was winter bare but had clearly been tended. She stood in the entrance and took it in and recalibrated. Amina ran immediately toward the garden and pressed her face against the glass door, and Ji Huan watched her the way he'd been watching her all morning, in those quick, covert glances that he probably thought were subtle and were not even close to subtle, each one containing more feeling than everything else about him combined. A woman appeared from the back of the house, 50s, short, with the brisk economy of movement that belongs to people who have been running households for decades. Ji Huan introduced her as Mrs. O, said 3 words to her in Korean, and she turned to Amina immediately with an expression that went from professional to genuinely charmed in about 2 seconds flat. "Can she take her to see the garden?" Ji Huan asked Nia. Nia watched her daughter, who was now attempting to communicate something urgent about the garden to Mrs. O through the glass. "Yeah," she said. "She's fine." They went to his study. It was the most personal room she'd seen yet. Desk covered in papers, 2 screens, a whiteboard on one wall with writing she couldn't read from this angle. He closed the door and she sat in the chair across from the desk, and he stood at the whiteboard and uncapped a marker and looked at her. "Everything," he said. So she told him everything. She talked for 2 hours. He wrote. He didn't interrupt often, occasional questions, specific and precise, asking for details she hadn't thought were important, and writing them down when she provided them. She told him about the woman in her apartment, silver hair, late 50s or early 60s, Korean, spoke English without an accent, a scar on her left hand, thin and white, curving over the knuckle of her index finger. The specific photograph she'd glimpsed on the woman's phone, Ji Huan, younger, maybe 20, in a dark suit at some formal occasion, standing next to this woman with the ease of proximity, the ease of someone who has been standing next to this person his whole life. She told him about the documentation the woman had brought, police reports, incident files, names of people who had been hurt by the syndicate. Some of it had been real. She'd checked later, the way you check things you already half believe. Some of it she was now not sure about. She told him about the flight she'd taken, Lagos via Doha, then back to Lagos, then a year in London, then 3 years building a life that was stable enough for Amina and was always slightly too small, always slightly airless, always containing the low-grade impossible weight of a secret she couldn't put down. She told him about the staffing agency, the contact name, a man called Seo, first name never given, the offer that had come via email to an address she hadn't given anyone in Korea, which she had noticed and told herself was a coincidence because she'd needed the money, and Amina needed stability, and there are only so many red flags a person can keep refusing before exhaustion wins. Ji Huan wrote it all down. At the end, she sat back in the chair and felt hollowed out, and also, strangely, lighter. The specific lightness of things put down. He was standing at the whiteboard looking at what he'd written. His back was to her. She looked at the whiteboard. She could read some of it now, the parts in English. Names, dates, arrows connecting things. "You knew it was her," Nia said. "When I described the woman, you already knew." He didn't answer immediately. "Ji Huan." He turned around. His face was composed. It was always composed, but she was starting to learn what composed meant in the context of his face, which was to say she was starting to learn to read what it covered. "I suspected," he said. "This morning confirmed it." "She's your mother?" "Yes." "And she faked my death and built a grave and has been monitoring my daughter for 4 years." "Yes." Nia looked at him. "What are you going to do?" He capped the marker. He set it down on the tray below the whiteboard with a small, precise click. "I'm going to find out how deep it goes," he said. "What she planned, what she still has in motion." He paused. "And then I'm going to end it. She runs the syndicate alongside you." "She ran it alongside me," he said. Past tense. Nia absorbed this. "People in your organization, how many of them answer to her directly?" He looked at her steadily. "That's the right question." "I know it's the right question. How many?" "I don't know yet." He said it without hesitation, which she realized was its own kind of honesty. The honesty of someone who is not in the habit of pretending to knowledge they don't have. "I know which lieutenant she brought up herself before I took over. I know who was loyal to her before they were loyal to me, and I've always assumed that loyalty was transferable." He paused. "I may have been wrong about that." The weight of what that meant settled into the room. If Hierin had embedded loyalists in the syndicate, people who reported to her, who acted on her directives independently of Ji Huan, then the structure Ji Huan thought he controlled had a shadow structure inside it. Another architecture, built underneath his, invisible until now. "You're going to need to find out who they are before she realizes you know," Nia said. "Yes." "And you can't tip her off." "No." Which means everything has to look normal from her perspective. Your behavior, your meetings, your... She stopped. "She's going to want to see you. She's going to push to have a conversation about last night. She'll contact me today. I told her not to. She'll do it anyway." "What are you going to say to her?" He was quiet for a moment. "That I was angry this morning and I overreacted. That I need time to process." He said it without particular expression. "I'm going to lie to her, Nia, the way she's been lying to me." The name in his mouth, her name, said plainly, no title, landed in a way she hadn't expected. She nodded slowly. "Okay, and while you're doing that?" "While I'm doing that, I need you to write down everything you told me. Dates, names, every detail, all of it." He looked at her. "I need documentation. I'm going to need to present this to people who will require proof." "You're going to expose her?" "Yes." "To the syndicate?" "To every leader in it." His voice was very flat. "Publicly, with evidence." The room held that for a moment. Nia thought about this woman who had sat in her apartment 5 years ago and laid out a case with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly how to present information in exactly the right order to produce exactly the desired response. She thought about how thoroughly she had been managed. She thought about Amina, 3 floors below them, probably currently explaining something important to Mrs. O about Pepper's dietary preferences. "Okay," she said. "I'll write it down." He turned back to the whiteboard. She watched his shoulder blades through his shirt, the tension held there, the controlled and effortful stillness of a man who is managing something very large and not letting it show. "Ji Huan," he turned. "Whatever else happened, whatever your mother did." She held his gaze. "Amina is the best thing I've ever done. I want you to know that, whatever the circumstances." Something moved through his face, quick and unguarded, and gone, almost immediately, but she saw it. "I know," he said. He turned back to the whiteboard. She stood and moved toward the door. His phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, read the screen. His jaw tightened fractionally. That tiny tell she was learning. "My mother," he said, without looking up. She says she has something I need to see, something she found this morning. He looked up. She says it concerns Amina. The air in the room shifted. What does that mean? Nia said. He was already dialing. I don't know. He pressed the phone to his ear, waited. His eyes, when they came to hers, had gone to that particular cold and windless place behind the composure, the place where he went when emotion was a liability. The call connected. What did you find? He said. And whatever Hyarin said next made the color leave his face for the first time since Nia had known him. The first time the composure broke, not completely, but enough. A fracture line running through it, visible, real. He lowered the phone slowly. She's here, he said. She came to the house. He was moving before he finished the sentence. Down the hallway, down the stairs, through the main room, and Nia was right behind him, not asking questions, not hesitating, moving with the specific urgency of a mother whose child is in a house that has just become dangerous. Her footsteps were faster than his. He let her pass him at the bottom of the stairs because she knew what she needed, and he couldn't stop her even if he'd wanted to. The garden door was open. Mrs. O was standing just inside it, with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged into the careful blankness of a woman who has worked for powerful people long enough to know that blankness is the safest expression when things are happening that she doesn't understand. She stepped aside when she saw them coming. She didn't speak. Hyarin was in the garden. She was crouched down in the winter-dead grass in her charcoal coat, with her silver hair and her composed face, and Amina was standing in front of her, and they were talking. Just talking. Amina had Pepper pressed against her chest, and she was listening to whatever Hyarin was saying with the particular focused attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, and Hyarin was speaking quietly, almost gently, in the measured cadences of someone who has spent a lifetime knowing exactly how to make people feel at ease. Nia crossed the garden in 6 steps and put herself between her daughter and Hyarin and lifted Amina in one motion, the practiced single-arm lift of a woman who has been picking up this child since she weighed nothing, and turned so her body was between Amina and the older woman. Amina said mama with mild protest, the protest of someone who was in the middle of an interesting conversation and has been interrupted. It's okay, baby, Nia said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Jihuan reached the garden 3 seconds behind her and stopped. Hyarin straightened up from her crouch with the unhurried ease of someone who had not been caught doing anything wrong, which was, he was beginning to understand, her permanent state of being. She smoothed her coat. She looked at Jihuan with that composure, that ageless, controlled composure, and she said, I let myself in. Mrs. O knows the code. I gave it to her when the house was... Why are you here? His voice came out very quiet. I told you. I found something this morning, after our conversation. She reached into her coat pocket. Something you need to see. You came to my house without permission. You are in my garden with my daughter. Your daughter, Hyarin repeated. There was something in the repetition, not mockery, not exactly, but a quality of deliberate precision. Yes, that's rather the point. She held out what she had taken from her pocket. A small drive, USB, matte black. She held it between 2 fingers the way you hold something you want the other person to take. Jihuan didn't move. What's on it? He said. Documentation, she said. The kind I should have shown you years ago, perhaps. She paused. Or the kind that would have changed nothing because you wouldn't have been ready to hear it. She looked at Nia, a look that traveled over Nia's shoulder and hit Nia's face directly, cool and assessing and completely without apology. The child's medical records. From a private clinic in Lagos, 18 months ago. The garden was very quiet. The winter air sat still around them. What clinic? Nia said. Her voice had changed. Dr. Adebayo Mensah's private practice in Victoria Island. The records were filed under a secondary surname, Okafor Williams, which I imagine was intentional. Hyarin's eyes didn't move from Nia's face. Amina was tested 18 months ago. Genetic panel, comprehensive. The results are on this drive. A pause. Along with a document you signed, Nia, a consent form for the testing, in your handwriting. Nia's arms tightened around Amina. I never signed anything, she said. The signature disagrees with you. It's forged. Is it? Hierin turned back to Ji Huan. I had the child's DNA tested. I needed to confirm paternity before I could take the next step. She said this the way she said everything, with the flat certainty of someone reporting facts. The results confirm she is yours, conclusively. She extended the drive again. Take it, Ji Huan. This is documentation of your legal claim. I had it prepared by the firm we use for custody. Custody, Ji Huan said. The word came out strange, flat and strange, the way words come out when the brain is processing something the mouth has already said. If the mother is deemed an unfit guardian, unstable employment history, no fixed residence in Korea, a history of… Stop! Ji Huan's voice cracked through the garden like something thrown. Not loud, but absolute. Stop talking. Hierin stopped. He looked at her and felt the coal in his chest that had been burning low and steady since 6 a.m. become something else. Not hot, not anymore, but cold. The specific cold of something that has burned all the way through to the other side of itself and come out as something harder. You were going to take her, he said. Hierin said nothing. You put Nia in this hotel. You engineered last night's scene. You were going to let the paternity become public. Let me claim the child. And then he stopped. He could see the rest of it. He could see the shape of it now, the full shape he hadn't been able to look at directly before, and it was larger than he'd thought, and it was directed at him personally in a way that was… You were going to use the custody process to take her, get her away from Nia, get her into the organization. You were going to… I was going to secure the next generation, Hierin said. Her voice had changed now too, still controlled, but underneath the control something older and harder. The voice she used when she was done being diplomatic. You are 26 years old. You are excellent at what you do, and you are also reckless, and you are also compromised, repeatedly, by sentiment. I have watched you for 6 years lead this organization, and I have watched you make decisions based on loyalty when you should make them based on strategy, and I have… She's 4 years old. She is a Kang. Hierin said it like a fact of geology, like a mountain named. She is the next generation of this family and this organization, and I was going to ensure that she was raised correctly, that she understood what she was inheriting, that she was not… Her eyes moved to Naya and back. Raised outside of it, in poverty, in hiding, in ignorance of her own name. Nia made a sound, not a word, something that came from further back than words. You monitored her for 4 years, Ji Huan said. He was very still now. The stillness of someone who has gone past the point where motion is useful. She was a child. She was a 4-year-old child, and you had files on her. You had her medical records. He paused. What else? Hierin's jaw moved very slightly. What else is on that drive? Ji Huan? What else? She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at him his entire life. With that love that was real, he had never doubted it was real. And that was the thing that made it so impossible to hold, because the love was real and the manipulation was real, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and he didn't have a framework for that yet. He was building one in real time. There's a file, she said, on Nia's background, the full background, what she was before Lagos, what her family… I don't need you to tell me about my family, Nia said. Her voice was quiet and absolute. Whatever you think you have on me. I don't think. I know. Hierin turned to her fully for the first time. Your father, Chukwuemeka Okafor, Lagos, 1987 to 2019. I know what he was involved in, Nia. I know who he worked for. I know the name of the organization, and I know what debts your family still carries from his activities. She paused. I know that you left Lagos not just because of the pregnancy, but because of what came after your father's death. I know who you were running from before Ji Huan was ever a factor. The garden was absolutely silent. Nia's face had gone somewhere Ji Huan couldn't read. Not blank. Too much was happening beneath the surface for blank. But closed, a door shut hard, and underneath the door something that sounded like it might be breaking. That's not… Nia started. Stopped. I'm not interested in using it against you, Hierin said, and the voice was almost gentle again, which was worse. I never was. I needed to understand the full picture. I needed to know who had my grandchild, what risks she was exposed to, what the... She was exposed to you, Nia said. The gentleness in Hye-rin's voice had done something to Nia's, stripped a layer off it, left it rawer than Ji-hwan had heard it. For 4 years she was monitored by you without my knowledge. You had her tested without my consent. You forged my signature. You were going to take her from me, and you're standing here talking about risks? I was going to give her everything. She had everything. She had me. Nia's voice broke on the last word. She pressed it back together with visible effort. She had me, and she was fine, and she was happy, and she didn't need to be a piece in your game. Hye-rin looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite respect, but occupied the space between them. You would have kept her hidden forever, she said quietly. In small apartments in cities where no one knew her name, working jobs below your education, watching over your shoulder for people from your father's past and people from Ji-hwan's world simultaneously. She paused. That is not a life. That is a siege. It was her life. It was our life, and it was ours. Hye-rin looked at Ji-hwan. He had not moved. He had been standing in the same position since the word custody, which was when the full architecture of what his mother had built had become visible to him, and he was still processing it. Not the facts. He had the facts. He'd had most of them since this morning, but the intention. The specific cold-blooded intention of a woman who had looked at a 4-year-old child and seen a succession plan. Go inside, he said to Nia. Quiet, even. She looked at him. Please, he said. She looked at his mother. She looked back at him. She turned and carried Amina through the garden door, and the door clicked shut behind her, and Ji-hwan stood alone with Hye-rin in the winter garden, and the silence closed over them like water. You plan to eliminate me, he said. Hye-rin's expression didn't change. That's the end of it, isn't it? He said it the way he said things he already knew. Raise Amina inside the organization. Train her. Build her loyalty to you, not to me. And once she was old enough, once you had her fully, I become... He stopped. A liability. The way Nia was a liability. The way anyone becomes a liability when you've extracted what you need from them. You were never going to be eliminated, she said. Then what? Managed, she said. The word came out precisely. You would have been managed, contained, given a role that suited your skills without... She stopped herself. Without the parts of me you couldn't control. She was quiet. The sentiment, he said. That's what you said this morning. I make decisions based on loyalty, based on sentiment. He looked at her. You were going to let me have a relationship with my daughter. Supervised, controlled, mediated by you. Close enough that I was invested. Not close enough that I had real influence. He paused. And you would have run everything through her. Through a child. For 20 years. It would have been the most secure transition in the history of this organization, Hye-rin said. And there was something in her voice now that was the closest thing to passion he'd ever heard from her. A belief, genuine and deep, that she was right. No power vacuum, no rival claims. A direct lineage trained from the beginning, loyal to the family name. She's not a succession plan, Ji-hwan said. She's a child. She is both, Hye-rin said, as you were both, as I was both. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the others. Ji-hwan looked at his mother. This woman he had known every day of his life, who had taught him strategy and patience and the particular ruthlessness that powerful positions require, who had sat across from him at dinner tables and stood beside him at funerals and walked him through the takeover of an empire with the systematic calm of someone who had always known exactly what she was building. And he understood something that he had always known and never fully let himself know. She had been doing this his whole life. He was not the first plan. He was the previous plan. How old were you? He said. When your mother started. Something moved in Hye-rin's face, ancient and private. That's not relevant, she said. How old? A pause. Her jaw shifted. 8, she said. Ji-hwan breathed in, breathed out. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said. And he meant it. He felt it. The specific ache of understanding something terrible about a person you love and not being able to unknow it. I'm sorry someone did that to you. Hierin looked at him, and for one moment, just one, her face was not composed. The architecture slipped, and underneath it was something old and tired, and possibly the most honest thing he had ever seen from her. Then it closed. "Give me the drive," Ji-hwan said. She looked at it in her hand. She looked at him. She placed it in his outstretched palm. "You should know," she said quietly, "that the drive is not the only copy." He closed his fingers around it. "And you should know," he said, "that there are currently 3 of my people going through every file in your office, every digital record, every physical document." He watched her face. "I called them from the study, while Nia was telling me everything." He paused. "I've been building the case since 6 a.m. Hierin went very still. "Whatever's on this drive," he said, "I have the originals. Whatever you copied, I have the source." He put the drive in his pocket. "And the custody filing you started, the attorney you contacted, the clinic in Lagos, the forged consent form, my legal team has already been briefed." She looked at him. He looked back. He had learned everything he knew from her. Everything. How to read a room and how to prepare and how to anticipate and how to move pieces before the other player knew the game had started. He had learned it all from watching her. He had spent 26 years becoming exactly what she'd built him to be, and it had never once occurred to him to ask who that served. He knew now. He looked at his mother and felt the grief of it, clean and sharp and completely without indulgence. And then he set it aside. Because grief was for later. Grief was for the private, windless place inside his chest. And right now there was still the problem of the shadow structure, the loyalists. The people in his organization who reported to her, who moved on her directives, who had been her instruments for years and were still, potentially, in motion. "How many people in the syndicate answer to you directly?" he said. She said nothing. "Mother, you won't stop this," she said. "What I've built inside the organization, the relationships, the loyalties, you can't simply—" "How many?" She looked at him with that expression, love and calculation, and something underneath both that he didn't have a name for. And she said nothing, and her silence was its own answer, because Hierin only went silent when the truth would damage her more than the refusal to speak. "Get out of my house," he said, "and don't come back." She picked up her bag. She moved through the garden with that infuriating, unhurried grace, through the side gate, and he heard the car door and the engine, and then nothing. He stood in the empty garden. The winter sky was low and gray, and the bare branches of the trees were perfectly still, and somewhere inside the house he could hear, very faintly, Amina talking to Mrs. O, her voice carrying the particular cadence of a child narrating something important. He went inside. He found Nia in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with both hands around a cup of tea. She wasn't drinking, staring at the surface of the table. And she looked up when he came in, and he could see she'd been crying. Not recently. The evidence was already drying, but recently enough that her eyes were still swollen at the corners, and her jaw had that particular set of someone who has cried and stopped and is holding the line against starting again. He sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your father," he said. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "His name was Chukwe Meka. He died when I was 23. She paused. "He was involved in— it was a distribution network, Lagos. Mostly narcotics, some other things. He didn't tell me the extent of it until he was dying." She looked at the table. "After he died, the people he owed came for what they thought the family owed them. I took Amina, and I ran." "You've been running from 2 directions," he said. "Yes. The people from your father's network, are they still active?" "I don't know. I've been careful. I don't think they tracked me to Korea." She paused. "But I don't know." He absorbed this. It was a new variable, a new line on the whiteboard. He filed it and held it and set it aside for the moment, because there was something more immediate. "My mother has people inside my organization," he said. "I don't know how many. I don't know which positions. I need to identify them before I move against her publicly, because if I expose her to the syndicate leadership before I've secured those people, she'll know it's coming, and she'll—" He stopped. "She'll activate them. And I don't know what they've been instructed to do in that scenario." Nia was looking at him. "You mean she might have a contingency?" she said slowly. "Something she built in case this moment came." "Yes. Something aimed at you." He said nothing. Or at us, she said. He said nothing. Her hands tightened on the cup. How long do you have? She asked. Before she moves? She knows I've started pulling her files. She knows I've briefed legal. She knows I know about the custody plan. He paused. Hours. Maybe less. Nia stood up abruptly. The chair scraped. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, and he watched her shoulders rise and fall with a breath that was controlled and effortful. My daughter is in this house, she said. I know. Your mother was just in this garden with my daughter, and she was... Her voice tightened. She was talking to her. What was she saying to her? I don't know. I need to know. He stood. He moved to the doorway. Mrs. Oh, he called. She appeared immediately from the next room. What was Madame Kang saying to the child in the garden? Mrs. O's hands moved together in the way they did when she was uncertain whether to speak. Mrs. O. She was asking her questions, Mrs. O said carefully. What she liked, what she remembered, whether she knew her father's name. She paused. And she told the child, she said she was her grandmother. She told her that she loved her. A pause. And she told her that if anyone tried to take her away from her father, the child should come to her, that she would always be safe with her. The kitchen was very still. Nia turned around from the window. Her face was the particular combination of rage and fear that belongs to a person who has understood, fully and without remaining ambiguity, the nature of the threat in front of them. She was recruiting her, Nia said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She was recruiting a 4-year-old. Jihuan was looking at the middle distance, at the specific point where he could think without the thinking being disrupted by what he felt. And he was running numbers, running the timeline, running the structure of what he needed to do and in what order. And all of it was pointing toward the same conclusion. He was out of time. He was out of time, and his mother had a head start. And there were unknown quantities inside his organization, and he had a woman and a child in his house who were now, because of him, because of his name, because of the world he'd built, targets. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Park Sung-jin, 2nd lieutenant, one of the men who had been with the organization for 12 years, who had been brought up under Hye-rin's direct mentorship, who Ji-hwan had always assumed was his. He picked up. Boss. The voice was careful, too careful, the careful of someone who has been told what to say. There's a situation. The Leadership Council. 3 of the senior members are requesting an emergency meeting. Tonight. They say it's urgent. Ji-hwan's hand tightened on the phone. Who called the meeting? He said. A pause. Long enough to mean everything. It was suggested, Park said, by Madame Kang. The kitchen was very quiet. Ji-hwan looked at Nia. She was looking back at him with the face of someone who has run the same numbers he has and arrived at the same place. She had moved first. His mother had moved first, and she was faster than he'd expected, and the emergency council meeting was not a discussion. It was a stage. It was Hye-rin's stage, built for her narrative, and whatever she planned to say in that room, she had been preparing it for longer than tonight, possibly for years. And if she got there first, if she controlled that room before he could, tell them I'll be there, he said into the phone. He ended the call. He looked at Nia. She's going to the council, Nia said. Not a question. She's already going. He moved toward the doorway. She's going to present her version before I can present mine. She's going to... He stopped, turned back. I need to get there first. I need to be in that room when it starts, not after. Then go. I can't leave you here. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to go stop her. She held his gaze. I'll stay here with Mrs. O. The house is secure, you said. The house has a code my mother knew. He was already on his phone, already texting. I'm changing it, and I'm sending 2 of my men, people I personally trust, not anyone who could be hers. He typed fast. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't answer any calls from numbers you don't know. If anything feels wrong, Ji-hwan. Her voice cut through the instructions. He stopped. Go, she said. Go end this. He looked at her. He looked at Amina, visible through the doorway, sitting on the floor of the next room with Mrs. O carefully dressing Pepper in a small cloth being fashioned from a kitchen towel narrating the process with complete focused seriousness. He had missed 4 years. He was not going to miss what came next. He picked up his jacket. He walked to the front door. His hand was on the handle when Nia said from the kitchen doorway, "Be careful." He didn't turn around. "Lock the door behind me," he said. He stepped out into the cold Seoul afternoon, and the door clicked shut at his back, and he was already moving, already on the phone, already marshaling everything he had, because Madame Kang Hye-rin had a 40-minute head start and a lifetime of preparation and a room full of men who had always believed that she was. The car moved through Seoul at speed, and Ji-hwan sat in the back with his phone in both hands and worked. He worked the way he always worked under pressure, without wasted motion, without the internal noise that other men called doubt, texting in bursts, making calls that lasted under 60 seconds, each one a precise instruction to a precise person. His driver knew the route. His security knew to follow. The city moved past the windows in the blur of late afternoon light, and Ji-hwan did not look at it. First call, his attorney, Kim Dae-won, 43 years old, 30 of them in criminal and corporate law, a man who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing, and whose loyalty to Ji-hwan was contractual and personal in equal measure. "I need everything we pulled from my mother's files organized by category. Evidence of the forged documents first. Nia Okafor's fabricated death certificate. The custody filing, all of it time-stamped and sourced. I need it presentable in—" He checked the time. 40 minutes. "It'll be close," Kim said. "Make it close." Second call. Baek Hyun, his personal investigator who had been with him since the beginning and whose specific talent was finding the architecture underneath things. The loyalty map. Everything you have on who Hye-rin brought into the organization before my tenure. Cross-reference with the 3 senior members who called tonight's council. I need to know which of them are hers before I walk into that room. "I have 2 of the 3 already," Baek said. "The third is unclear." "Work faster." Third, Park Sung-jin, the man who had called with the meeting notice. Ji-hwan had been turning Park over in his mind for 20 minutes, examining him from every angle. 12 years in the organization, Hye-rin's direct mentorship, the careful voice on the phone, but also 3 years of working directly under Ji-hwan, 3 years of being reliable in the specific way that is hard to fake, hard to sustain as performance across that much time and that many tests. He called him. Park answered on the first ring. "Who told you to call me?" Ji-hwan said. A long pause. "Park." "Madam Kang contacted me directly," Park said. His voice was different now. The careful was gone, replaced by something that sounded like a man who has been holding something uncomfortable for several hours and is relieved to set it down. 2 hours ago. "She told me to notify you about the council meeting. She told me exactly what to say." "She scripted the call." "Yes. And you called me anyway." "I called you the way she told me to," Park said. "But I'm telling you now that she told me to." A pause. "There's a difference." Ji-hwan looked out the window. "Yes," he said. "There is." He breathed once. "Are you mine, Park?" The pause was shorter this time. "Always," Park said, "since the beginning." "Then here's what I need from you." He talked for 4 minutes. Park listened without interrupting. At the end, Park said, "Understood," and the line went dead, and Ji-hwan set the phone on his knee and let himself have 30 seconds of something that was not quite stillness, but was the closest he was going to get to it for the rest of the night. He thought about Amina, her voice carrying through the house, narrating something about Pepper. He picked up his phone and sent a text to the number of the man he'd stationed outside the Hanam-dong house, just a question mark, and received a thumbs up in return. He breathed. He thought about Nia standing in the kitchen doorway. "Go end this." He looked out at Seoul, and Seoul did not care, and he was glad for it. The council chamber was on the 14th floor of a building in Gangnam that appeared, to anyone who didn't know, to be an unremarkable commercial property. Financial services on the lower floors, various holding companies above, nothing that would attract attention. The 14th floor had no listing. The elevator required a key card and a 4-digit code, and the knowledge that the button you needed to press was not the one labeled 14, but the unlabeled one below it. Ji-hwan arrived 23 minutes after Park Sung-jin's call. His mother had a 40-minute head start. He was still first. He stepped out of the elevator into the anteroom, and he knew immediately, from the body language of the two men standing near the council chamber door, that something was already happening inside. They were both his, faces he knew, men he trusted, and they both looked at him with the specific expression of people who have information and have been waiting for him to arrive so they can give it. "She's not in there yet," the taller one said. "But 3 of the seniors arrived 30 minutes ago. They've been waiting." "Who are the 3? The names?" He had 2 of them from Beck already. Director Lim and Chairman O. Both men his mother had elevated before his tenure. Both men whose loyalty he had always assumed was his by inheritance and was now reconsidering with the cold clarity of someone who should have examined this assumption years ago. The third name was Shin Woo-cheol, and Shin was the variable, not one of Hye-rin's known placements, a man who had risen under Ji-hwan's own watch, a man he had promoted twice. He filed this. He walked to the chamber door, he pushed it open. The 3 men inside looked up. The council chamber was deliberately unimpressive. A long table, good chairs, no windows, lighting that was functional rather than atmospheric. Power didn't need to perform itself in rooms like this. Everyone who sat in this room already knew where they were. Director Lim was at the far end of the table, a man in his 60s with the specific watchfulness of someone who has survived multiple regime changes by knowing exactly when to reposition. Chairman O was to his left, heavy-set, with an expression Ji-hwan had never been able to fully read. Shin Woo-cheol was nearest the door, and he was the only one who looked, not guilty, but alert. The alertness of a man who is watching very carefully to determine which way things are going to fall. Ji-hwan sat at the head of the table. He put nothing on the table in front of him. He folded his hands. He looked at each of them in turn, the slow, deliberate sweep that he had learned from his mother and was going to use now in a room assembled by his mother, which was the specific kind of irony that had no name. "Let's not waste time," he said. "I know why this meeting was called. I know who called it, and I know what you were told to expect from it." He paused. "I'm going to tell you something different, and then you're going to make a choice." Director Lim shifted. "Ji-hwan? Not yet. Quiet. Absolute. You'll speak when I'm finished." Lim stopped. "My mother has been running a secondary operation within this organization for an indeterminate period," Ji-hwan said, "parallel to my leadership, reporting structure that bypassed my office. She has been using this organization's infrastructure and resources for a personal agenda that none of you were fully briefed on." He let that sit for 2 seconds. "She faked the death of a woman I was involved with 5 years ago. She suppressed the existence of my daughter, my biological daughter, confirmed, for 4 years. She initiated a custody proceeding to take the child from her mother and place her under her own control, with the long-term intention of using that child as leverage against my position." The room was extremely still. "She called this meeting," he continued, "because she knows I have her files. She intended to get here first and frame this as a crisis of my making. She intended to present me as compromised, emotionally, operationally, and herself as the stable alternative." He looked at each of them again. "I'm telling you this so that when she arrives, you know what you are listening to." Shin Woo-cheol leaned forward slightly. "You have documentation. My attorney is preparing it now. You'll have it in your hands within the hour." "The child," Chairman O said. His voice was careful. "You're certain of paternity. Genetic confirmation. Also visually unambiguous, if you'd like to make your own assessment." Ji-hwan kept his voice dry. "She has my jaw." Something moved in Shin's face. Not a smile, not quite, but something. The elevator in the anteroom activated. Everyone heard it, the specific mechanical sound of something descending and then rising, the cable tension, the whir. Ji-hwan did not look toward the door. He kept his eyes on the 3 men across the table and watched them hear it and watched them recalibrate. The subtle repositioning of people who have just felt the tectonic plate shift under their feet and are deciding where to stand. Director Lim looked at Ji-hwan. Then he looked at the door. Then he looked back at Ji-hwan. "I want to see the documentation," he said, "before anything else." "You'll have it." The door opened. Hye-rin walked in. She took in the room in one sweep. Ji-hwan at the head of the table, the 3 men, the expressions, the quality of the silence. And her face gave nothing, but her steps slowed by a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. Just enough. She pulled out the chair to Ji-hwan's right, the position she had always occupied in council meetings, since before he was old enough to sit at the head. She sat in it with the unhurried certainty of someone who has sat in this chair 100 times. "I see you arrived early," she said to Ji-hwan. "I did. Good." She set her bag on the table, opened it, began removing papers. "Then everyone is here and we can begin." She looked at the three men across the table. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. What I have to share with you tonight concerns the stability of this organization in a period of significant external mother." She paused. "We've already begun," Ji-hwan said. She looked at him. He looked back. This was the moment. He could feel it in the room, the way you feel a barometric change before weather hits, the specific pressure of something about to break. Hyerin understood it too. He could see it in the set of her mouth, the particular controlled adjustment of a woman reassessing her position in real time, calculating, always calculating. "Then tell me what you've said," she said, her voice entirely even. "The truth," he said. "All of it." Her jaw moved very slightly. "Ji-hwan, the grave," he said. "Start there, if you want to defend it. Tell them about the grave." The silence in the room changed quality. Director Lim looked at Hyerin with an expression that was no longer watchful but openly assessing. Chairman Oh's hands, resting on the table, pressed flat. Shin Woo-cheol was completely still. Hyerin looked at her papers. Then she set them down. Then she looked at her son. "You don't understand the full picture," she said. "Then complete it. What I did, what I've done, was to protect this organization and this family across a longer timeline than you've been operational. You've been in this chair for 6 years. I've been building this for 30. I have made decisions that required a perspective. You built a grave." Ji-hwan's voice was still quiet. He was still not raising it. He had learned very early that volume was for people who needed it. "You stood next to me at that grave, in the rain, for 40 minutes. He paused. "I cried. At that grave. I don't do that. I have done it exactly twice in my adult life, and once was at that grave." He let the room hold that. "I want them to know that. I want everyone in this room to know what you watched me do, at a grave you built." Hyerin's composure did not break, but something moved in her eyes, something she couldn't control and couldn't conceal, and that he recognized with a sorrow that had nothing to do with forgiveness, because it was love. It was her actual love for him, surfacing through everything, and it did not make any of this better. "You are compromised," she said softly. "Right now. You're in this room with grief and anger, and you are making decisions based on evidence," he said. "Documented, time-stamped, witnessed." He looked at the other three. "You will have it within the hour. When you read it, the question you will need to answer is simple. Who do you answer to? Me? Or the shadow structure my mother has built inside this organization without your knowledge or consent?" He paused. "Because if it was without your knowledge, if you didn't know about the custody filing, the forged documents, the placement of a civilian inside this building, then you have been managed as thoroughly as I have, and you deserve to know that." Lim's eyes had gone to Hyerin and stayed there. Oh's jaw had tightened. Shin Woo-cheol said, "The child, where is she now?" "In my house, under my protection." "The mother?" "With her." Shin nodded slowly, the nod of a man doing math. "And Madam Kang's access to your residence?" "Revoked, as of this morning." Shin looked at Hyerin. "Did you go to the house today?" Hyerin looked at Shin with the particular expression she reserved for people who were asking questions she hadn't invited. "Woo-cheol, did you speak to the child?" A pause. "Yes," she said. "What did you say to her?" The room waited. Hyerin looked at her son. "I told her I was her grandmother," she said, "because I am." "You told a 4-year-old child," Ji-hwan said, "that if anyone tried to take her away from her father, she should come to you." Silence. "You were recruiting her," Shin said. Not loud, almost wondering. "You were running your recruitment on a 4-year-old. I was establishing a relationship with a child you had secretly monitored for 4 years. Shin leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling briefly. Then he looked at Ji Huan. I'm with you, he said simply. Whatever you need. Lim, send me the documentation. I'll review it tonight. Oh said nothing. Oh was looking at Hierin with an expression that was unreadable and had been unreadable for the entire meeting and remained unreadable now. And Ji Huan noted this and filed it because O was the variable that had not resolved yet. And unresolved variables at this stage were the kind of thing that his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen under the table. A text from the man outside the Hanam Dong house. 3 words. Someone came. Stopped. He read it. Read it again. He looked up. He kept his face completely still. He typed back, status of the house. The reply took 11 seconds. 11 seconds in which the conversation in the room continued around him. Hierin saying something about organizational stability, Lim responding, Shin's voice cutting in. And Ji Huan sat at the head of the table and watched his phone and felt the cold spread from his chest outward. Secure. 2 men approached. Our people turned them back. Unknown affiliation. Gone now. He typed, description, professional. Armed, not police. He looked at his mother. She was speaking to Lim, her voice measured and even, making her case with the same clinical precision she'd used his entire life. And she did not look at him, and not looking at him was itself information. She had sent people to his house. She had sent people to his house while sitting in this room, while this conversation was happening, as a contingency, as the move she was playing simultaneously with the one visible on the surface because Hierin always played 2 moves, had always played 2 moves, and he had spent 26 years watching her and still hadn't fully understood. He stood up. Everyone stopped. We're adjourning, he said. His voice came out very flat. Lim, oh Shin, the documentation reaches you within the hour. We reconvene tomorrow morning, full council, every senior member. He was already moving toward the door. Everything gets decided then. Ji Huan. Hierin's voice was sharp with something he'd never heard from her before. Not panic. She didn't panic, but the specific edge of a person whose timeline has just been disrupted. We're not finished. I have to go home, he said. He walked out. He was on the phone before the elevator doors closed, his driver already moving, his security already notified, his whole body running on the specific cold adrenaline of a man who has just understood that the game he thought he was playing had a second board he hadn't seen. The car was waiting. He was in it and moving before the door had fully closed. Hanam Dong, he said. Now. His driver floored it. The city blurred past. Streetlights and traffic, and the ordinary indifferent motion of Seoul at night. And Ji Huan sat rigid in the back seat with his phone pressed to his ear, listening to it ring, willing it to connect, and when it connected and Nia's voice came through, steady, present, alive, he breathed for the first time in 4 minutes. There were men outside, she said. She already knew. Your people stopped them. We're okay. I'm 12 minutes away. We're okay, she said again. Steadier this time, deliberate. Amina is asleep. She went down an hour ago. She's fine, Ji Huan. He pressed his free hand flat against the seat. The leather was cold. He could feel every seam. I'm coming, he said. I know. A pause. Then, your mother. Yes. A silence that contained everything that needed to be said about that, and said none of it because there was no time. Tomorrow, she said. We end it tomorrow. Yes. Then get here, she said. Get here and we deal with tonight and tomorrow we finish it. He ended the call. He looked out the window. The city moved, and Seoul held everything in it, every life and every crisis and every ordinary night that was happening simultaneously, indifferent and continuous. And somewhere in a house in Hanam Dong, a 4-year-old girl was asleep with a worn elephant pressed to her chest, completely unaware, completely trusting, her whole small life held inside a situation she hadn't chosen. Ji Huan looked at his own hands. They were not shaking. He had made them not shake through the force of everything he was, and he kept them still now, and thought about tomorrow, about the full council, about the documentation, about the faces of 53 witnesses who had seen a child point across a room and say, Dad, about the structure his mother had built, and what it looked like when it came down, and what had to be done to bring it down completely, not partially, not surgically, but entirely. Every stone, every hidden room, every loyalty purchased in the dark. His mother had sent men to his house tonight. She had sat in that room and looked at him and sent men to his house. He thought about what that meant. He thought about what a woman who would do that was capable of, and how far that capability extended, and whether there was any version of this that ended without complete exposure, complete dismantling, complete and public severance. Not a private resolution, not a quiet managed transition, but the kind of reckoning that left no shadow structure standing because there was nowhere left. The car turned onto his street. The house was lit from inside, warm light through the windows. Two of his men visible near the gate, upright, professional, their eyes moving in the right patterns. He got out before the car stopped fully and walked to the door, and it opened before he could knock. Nia had heard the car, was standing in the entrance, still dressed, clearly had not slept, and was not going to sleep. She looked at his face. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough," he said. "She's not going to stop." "I know. Tomorrow I end it, in front of all of them. Everything." He looked at her. He was very tired and very awake simultaneously. The specific state of someone whose body and mind have stopped negotiating with each other and are simply operating. "I need you to be there. I need your testimony. Your voice, not just the documents." She held his gaze. "You're asking me to walk into a room full of syndicate leadership," she said. "Yes." "And testify against the woman who runs it alongside you." "Who ran it?" he said. Past tense. Nia was quiet for a moment. She looked past him toward the room where Amina slept. She looked back. "Okay," she said. He nodded. They stood in the entrance of the house, with the cold coming in behind him, and the warm light ahead, and tomorrow between them like a wall. They both knew they were going to have to break through, and neither of them spoke. And the silence was not empty, but full. Full of the 4 years and the grave and the garden and the child asleep in the next room, and everything that had been taken, and everything that was not yet decided, and the specific, terrifying, open question of what the morning would. He did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window in the main room and watched the street and listened to the house breathe around him. The specific night sounds of a building holding people inside it, the settling of walls, the distant hum of the city. And he thought about tomorrow with the careful, methodical attention of a man who cannot afford to miss anything. At 2 a.m., he checked his phone. Kim Dae-won had sent the documentation package. 47 pages. Organized by category exactly as requested. The forged death certificate first, then the fabricated accident report, then the custody filing with the forged consent form, then the financial records showing the staffing agency payments traceable back through 3 shell companies to an account under Hyerine's personal control. Photographs. Timestamps. A chain of evidence assembled in one night that represented the skeleton of something his mother had built across 5 years. He read all 47 pages. At 4 a.m., Nia appeared in the doorway in the clothes she'd been wearing all day, her braids pulled back, her eyes clear in the way eyes are clear when they haven't been closed. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything about the hour or the sleeplessness, because both of them understood that some nights are simply not for sleeping. She sat on the other end of the couch, and he handed her the documentation without a word, and she read it. All of it. He watched her face as she read, the set of her jaw, the occasional tightening around her eyes when she hit a specific passage, the moment she reached the custody filing, and her breathing changed, went shallow, and she pressed through it and came out the other side and set the last page down. She had a lawyer draw this up 3 weeks ago, Nia said, before the banquet. Yes. She was already moving before Amina even walked into that room. The banquet wasn't an accident, Ji-hwan said. She engineered the exposure. She needed the paternity to be public, witnesses, 53 of them, so that the custody claim had a foundation. Public acknowledgement of paternity by the father, mother deemed unfit, child placed with the paternal family. He paused. She had it sequenced. The exposure was step 1. Nia was quiet for a moment. She just didn't account for you moving faster than she expected. She's never had to account for that, Ji-hwan said. Before tonight, I had no reason to move against her. The words sat in the room. Nia looked at him, that direct look, the one that saw past the composure to whatever was underneath it. "How are you?" she said. He thought about answering the way he answered most things, efficiently, without excess. He looked at the window instead. The street was empty. The city beyond it was mostly dark. "She loved me," he said. "I know she did. I've never questioned that. No. And she was going to take my daughter and use her as a tool, and eventually—" He stopped. "It's possible to do both things. Be both things. I understand that now." He paused. "It doesn't make it hurt less." Nia said nothing. She didn't offer anything to cover the silence, which was the right thing. The silence was part of it. The silence needed to be there, and she understood that. After a while, he said, "Your father." She looked at him. "The people from his network, the ones who came after you." He turned from the window. "I want to deal with that, after tomorrow. I want to find out who they are, and I want to make sure they're not a threat to you anymore." Nia looked at him carefully. "That's not a small thing to ask." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you I'm going to do it." "Jihuan, you've been running for 4 years from 2 different directions," he said. "I'm not asking you to keep running." He held her gaze. "Let me deal with it." She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that is measuring something. Not him, not exactly, but the space between where they were and where that offer came from, the distance it represented, what it would mean to let someone into that particular place after 4 years of keeping it sealed. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Okay." They sat in the dark, and the city moved distantly around them, and at some point, without either of them acknowledging it, the silence became something that was not tense, but simply shared. 2 people in the same room, in the same trouble, waiting for the same morning. The full council convened at 9 a.m. 14 men around the long table in the chamber on the 14th floor. Jihuan at the head. Nia seated to his right, not at the table, in a chair against the wall, because she was not a member of this council, and he was not going to pretend she was, but present, visible, in the room. He had told her to sit where she could see every face, and she did. Hye-rin arrived last. She came in at 8:59, which was also deliberate, not late enough to be disrespectful, late enough to make an entrance, to read the room before she sat. She read it in 3 seconds, and Jihuan watched her read it, and watched her calibrate, and watched her decide, based on what she saw, to go very still and very careful. She sat at her usual position, to his right, between him and Nia, which was not accidental. Jihuan looked at the room. 14 faces. He knew all of them. He had worked alongside most of them. Some he trusted, and some he didn't, and some he was still unsure about, and all of them were here now, and all of them were going to hear what he had to say. "I'll be brief," he said, "because the documentation is complete, and you'll read it yourselves, and it doesn't need my narration." He looked at Kim Dae-won, who was seated against the far wall with a folder on his lap. Kim stood and began distributing copies. "What I'm going to tell you is the sequence, and then I'm going to tell you what happens next, and then we're going to vote." He told them the sequence, all of it, from Nia 5 years ago to the apartment and the woman who came and the persuasion and the flight, the pregnancy, the child, the fabricated death certificate, the grave. He told it without ornamentation, without the rhetorical architecture that makes hard truths more palatable, because these men did not need things made palatable, and he was not going to insult them with it. He told it flatly, chronologically, with reference to page numbers in the documentation as he went. He watched their faces as he spoke. Most of them were very still. The stillness of men who are processing information that is restructuring something they thought they understood. 2 of them, men he had already identified as Hye-rin's placements, were watching Hye-rin more than they were watching him, which confirmed what he already knew and which he also noted and filed. He told them about the staffing agency, the engineered placement, the banquet, Amina walking through the door. He told them about the custody filing, the forged consent form, the clinic in Lagos. He told them about the men who had come to his house last night. At this, the room shifted. Chairs moved. The specific sound of men who have been sitting still realizing they can't anymore. 2 senior members looked at each other. Shin Woo-cheol, seated 3 chairs down, pressed his mouth into a thin line, and looked at the table. "The men who came to my house," Jihuan said, "were not authorized by me or by any standing order of this council. They were sent by a private directive." He did not look at his mother. That directive came from someone in this room. Now he looked at her. Yirin was looking at him. Her hands were folded on the table. Her face was composed with the total architecture of a lifetime's practice. But her hands were not entirely still. The fingers of her left hand had shifted slightly, the way they had in the garden, the current passing through. "I want to speak," she said. "You'll speak," he said. "After I finish." She held his gaze. He turned back to the room. "The vote I'm asking for is on two questions. First, the removal of Madame Kang Hyerin from all positions of authority within this organization, effective immediately, permanently, with no right of reinstatement. Second, the formal recognition of Kang Amina, my daughter, as my legal heir and named successor within the organization's charter." He paused. "These are not connected votes. They do not depend on each other. You vote on each independently." "Before we vote," Director Lim said, "I want to hear from the woman." Jihuan looked at him. "Which woman?" Lim looked past Jihuan to where Nia sat. "Her, she." Jihuan looked at Nia. She was already standing. She walked to the head of the table and stood beside Jihuan's chair and looked at 14 men she had never met and said, "My name is Nia Okafor. I'm from Lagos originally. I've been living in Seoul for 11 months. Before that, I spent 4 years in various cities, working whatever jobs I could find, raising my daughter on my own, and trying not to be found by two separate groups of people who wanted something from me." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you I have clean hands. My father was involved in things I'm not proud of, and I've spent my adult life dealing with the consequences of that. But what I'm going to tell you is the truth about what happened to me 5 years ago and what has been done to my daughter without my consent. And I'm going to tell it plainly, and you can make of it what you will." She talked for 11 minutes. Jihuan did not watch her. He watched the room. He watched 14 men listen to her, and he watched what listening to her did to their faces. The specific, involuntary movement of people who are being confronted with something that is undeniably, plainly human. A woman talking about her child with the specific gravity of someone who has held that child through everything and is not asking for sympathy, but is also not concealing the weight of it. When she finished, she went back to her chair. The room was quiet. Chairman O, who had said almost nothing in 2 days and whose face had remained unreadable throughout, looked at Hyerin and said, "Did you send the men to the house?" Hyerin was quiet for a moment. "I sent people to ensure the child's safety," she said, "in a volatile situation where, did you send armed men to your son's home without his authorization?" A pause. "Yes," she said. O looked at Jihuan, nodded once, said nothing else. Jihuan looked at his mother. "You wanted to speak." She looked at him. She looked at the room. She looked, for the first time in his memory, in his entire 26 years, like a woman who has done the calculation and found that the numbers have finally come out wrong. Not beaten, not broken, but arrived at last at the end of something. "I built this organization," she said, "not alone, but I was here before most of you, and I will say without apology that the decisions I made, including the ones that have brought us to this table today, were made in service of this family's survival and this organization's continuity." She looked at Jihuan directly. "I was wrong about some of them. I am not often wrong. I was wrong about this." A pause. "The grave was..." Her voice caught, fractionally, almost imperceptibly. "That was wrong. I have known it was wrong for 4 years." The room was absolutely silent. "But I want you to understand," she continued, "that everything I did for him. I have always done everything for him. That is not a defense. I know it is not a defense. I am simply asking you to know it." She looked at her son, and her face was, finally and completely, without architecture. What was underneath it was old and tired and real, and she did not look away from him, and he did not look away from her, and they held it, all of it, the love and the lie and the grave and the garden and 40 minutes in the rain, between them in that room for a long moment. Then Jihuan looked at the council. Vote, he said. The vote on removal was 12-2. The two were the men he had already identified. He looked at them, and they looked at him, and the look contained everything that needed to be said about their future in the organization, which was brief. The vote on Amina's recognition was unanimous. What? Yirin left the building at 10:47 a.m. She walked out the way she had walked into every room for 30 years. Without hurry. Without the performance of dignity, because dignity was simply what she was, not something she put on. Her coat was buttoned, her hair was in place. Her driver was waiting. At the door she stopped. Jihuan was standing in the anteroom. She looked at him. He looked at her. Around them the building was quiet. The council had dispersed. The corridor was empty. It was just the two of them in the particular silence that belongs to endings. Don't contact Amina, he said. Not directly, not through intermediaries. Not yet. She heard the not yet. And eventually, she said. Eventually is not today. He paused. She'll know who you are. I'm not going to hide you from her, but on my terms. In my time. He held her gaze. You don't get to manage that. You don't get to manage anything anymore. Yirin was quiet for a moment. She looks like you, she said. The jaw. I know. She looked at him one more time. That look, the real one, the one that was underneath everything. And then she walked through the door and her driver opened the car and the door closed and she was gone. Jihuan stood in the empty anteroom. He breathed in, breathed out. He did not feel victorious. He had known he wouldn't. Victory and this were not the same category. This was closer to the feeling after surgery. The thing that was wrong had been removed, and you were alive, and the future was possible, and you were also exhausted in a way that went all the way to the bone. He went back upstairs. He had work to do. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing that large ever dismantled simply. There were structures to unwind, loyalties to reassess. The two men who had voted against him to be dealt with through channels that were legal where possible and decisive where necessary. There were meetings and documents and the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust in an organization that had just discovered it, had been operating with a shadow interior for years. Jihuan did it. He had always been good at the work, even when the work was difficult, especially when the work was difficult. It was the sentiment his mother had always said made him vulnerable, and it was also the thing that made him want to come home at the end of the day, which he was learning were not actually in conflict. He came home at the end of the day. Amina was in the garden every afternoon that wasn't raining, which was fewer than she wanted, and she expressed this regularly to anyone who would listen. She had established a relationship with Mrs. O that involved considerable negotiation over snack timing and what constituted an appropriate number of indoor plants to bring outside. And Mrs. O had opinions, and Amina had opinions, and they were working it out with a mutual respect that Jihuan found privately very funny. He taught her things in the mornings when he didn't have early calls. He hadn't planned to. It had started with Amina appearing at his desk at 7 a.m. and placing Pepper on top of whatever document he was reading and announcing that Pepper wanted to know what he was doing. He had explained, in terms he judged appropriate for a 4-year-old, what the document was about. She had listened with complete attention. She had asked 2 questions that were, if he was being honest, reasonably perceptive. He had answered them. The next morning, she was back at 7. He had moved the second chair around to his side of the desk. It became a thing. He did not announce it or name it. Naming it felt like it would make it fragile. But it was there, every morning, the chair and the desk and his daughter's extraordinary focused attention and the gradual, daily, incremental process of learning someone who was already entirely themselves, already a complete person, and also unmistakably his. She said Jihuan for 3 weeks before she said anything else. He did not rush her. He had told her once, carefully, in the way you tell a child something important without the weight of your needing it landing on them. You can call me whatever you want to call me. She had considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things and said, okay, and gone back to whatever she was doing. On a Tuesday morning in the 4th week, she was at his desk, and he was explaining something about the winter garden and which plants came back in spring, and she was listening with Pepper in her lap, and she said, without looking up from the plant diagram, Dad, why do they sleep underground? He was quiet for a moment. To get ready, he said, for when it's time to grow. She accepted this. She looked at the diagram. She said, "Pepper thinks that's smart," and went back to examining the illustration. He looked at the top of her head. The braids, the white beads, slightly disordered as they always were by mid-morning. The specific angle of her bent neck. The way she held a pencil when she was studying something, pressed to her lower lip, exactly the way he held a pen. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back to work. Boss. He found Nia in the kitchen most evenings when he came in. Not always, but she had taken a position with a cultural liaison organization in Mapugu, work that was closer to her actual education, and that she had started with the specific energy of someone who has been doing work below their capacity and is finally doing what they are actually capable of. She was good at it. She came home later on the days she was good at it, which he took as a positive sign. They had learned each other slowly, not romantically. That was not what the first weeks were. The first weeks were two people in a complicated situation trying to be honest without the honesty becoming pressure. But underneath the logistics there was something else, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it because naming it felt like it would put weight on something that needed to find its own shape first. He dealt with the Lagos problem in the 6th week. He did not tell her every detail of how. He told her it was done. He told her the names of the people involved and what had been agreed to and what the terms were, and she listened with the careful attention she brought to things that mattered. And when he was finished, she said, "That's it? It's done?" "It's done." She looked at the table for a moment. Something moved in her face. Not relief exactly, or not only relief. The specific expression of someone putting down something heavy enough that the absence of it is disorienting, that the body doesn't quite know what to do without the weight. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She made tea. She made 2 cups without asking. She set one in front of him and sat down across the table. Outside the window, the garden was winter bare, but there were shoots coming up in the corner bed, green against the gray soil, the ones Amina had been monitoring daily with intense personal investment. "I don't know how to do this," Nia said. Not distressed, matter of fact. "Whatever this is, I've been in survival mode for so long that I don't know what I do when I'm not surviving." "I think you live," Jihuan said. She looked at him. "I think that's what comes next." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "I don't know how to do it either. I've been building and managing and defending something for 6 years and I'm very good at it, and none of it is the same as—" He paused. "As this." "No," she said. "It isn't." They sat with that. The tea cooled slightly. The garden was still outside. Somewhere in the house, Amina was running. They could hear it, the specific rhythm of small feet that had decided a room was a racetrack. "She started calling me Dad," Jihuan said. Nia looked at him. "Tuesday," he said. "Garden conversation. It was—" He stopped. He looked at the table. He was not going to be able to finish that sentence without something showing that he didn't want to show, and Nia was looking at him with an expression that said she understood exactly what the sentence would have contained. "I know," she said, quietly. "I heard." He looked up. "I was in the hallway," she said. "I didn't mean to listen. I heard the two of you and I stopped." She paused. The way she said it, just slipped it in there, like she'd been saying it the whole time and was just letting you catch up. He breathed in. "Yeah," he said. She reached across the table. Not for his hand. She stopped short of that, her hand resting on the table between them, an offering without pressure. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He turned his hand over on the table, and she set hers in his palm, and neither of them moved, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the shoots were coming up green in the winter garden. Well, he proposed on a morning in early spring. He had not planned it for that morning specifically. He had been carrying the ring for 2 weeks, the same ring he had bought 5 years ago, before everything, when he had been 21 and sure about things in the uncomplicated way you're sure about things at 21, and which he had kept in the back of the drawer in his desk through 2 years of believing she was dead and 4 years of not examining why he had kept it. He had gotten it out 2 weeks ago and looked at it, and thought about the person who had bought it, and the person he was now, and decided there was enough of both to make the offering honest. They were in the garden in the morning light. Amina was examining the new growth in the corner bed with the focused intensity of a small scientist taking data. Jihuan was standing next to Nia, and they were doing what they did in the garden, which was stand close enough to talk without always talking. the specific, comfortable geography of people who have learned each other's proximity. He took the ring from his pocket. He held it out. No speech, no staging, just the ring in his open palm, offered. She looked at it. She looked at him. Is that? She stopped. Yes, he said. She understood what that meant, that it was old, that he had kept it. She looked at the ring, and she looked at his face, and he saw her do the math of what the ring represented and what he was saying by offering it rather than a new one, that she was not a replacement version, that the continuity was real, that all of it counted. Her eyes got bright. She pressed them briefly and got it under control. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her finger. Amina appeared at their elbows. She looked at her mother's hand. She looked at Ji Huan. She looked back at the hand. That's pretty, she said, with the practical aesthetic judgment of a person who has strong opinions about yellow flowers and orange leggings. Thank you, Nia said. Her voice was slightly unsteady, and she did not try to steady it. Amina studied the ring for another moment. Then she looked up at Ji Huan. Does this mean we're staying? She asked. In this house? Yes, Ji Huan said. She nodded. This satisfied her. She turned back to her plants. Ji Huan looked at Nia. Nia looked at Ji Huan. Between them and around them the garden was coming back. The bare branches filling with the first tentative green, the winter ending, the slow return of everything that had been waiting underground. The wedding was small. They held it in the garden in late April when the flowers were back and the air was warm enough without being hot. 12 people, all of them chosen carefully. Shin Woo-cheol and his wife, Kim Dae-won, Mrs. Oh, in the good coat she had clearly pressed the night before, 3 of Nia's colleagues from the liaison organization, 2 friends who had driven from Mapogu with flowers. Amina wore a yellow dress. This had not been negotiable. She stood between her parents through the entire ceremony with Pepper under one arm and a small bunch of the yellow flowers from the garden in her other hand, and watched the proceedings with the grave, attentive seriousness she brought to things she had decided were important. When it was done, she took Ji Huan's hand and Nia's hand and stood between them and looked at the assembled 12 people with the quiet satisfaction of someone who set out to do a thing and has done it. Which was, Ji Huan thought, exactly right, because she had. She had walked into a room full of the most dangerous people in Korea at 4 years old and pointed and said, "Dad," and the entire architecture of a conspiracy had come apart, and a family had come together and an empire had changed its shape, all because a small girl in white beads had decided it was time. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "Good?" she said. Her standard question, her all-purpose check-in. "Good," he said. She nodded. She went back to examining the yellow flowers with Pepper. Nia leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The garden was full of light, and the quiet voices of people who were happy, and the distant sound of soul going about its life, and the particular piece of something that has been broken and mended. Not invisibly, not pretending the break wasn't there, but held together by something that turned out to be stronger than the fracture. He stood in the garden with his wife and his daughter and the spring around them and thought about his mother. Not with anger, not anymore. Mostly with the sad, clear-eyed understanding of someone who has seen a thing for exactly what it is. He had sent word through Kim that the exile would be reviewed in 2 years. He did not know what that review would produce. He did not know if reconciliation was the right word for what was possible. He only knew that he was not his mother's heir in the way she had intended, and he was not going to be, and that Amina would grow up knowing her grandmother existed without being shaped by her as a tool. Some things had to be enough for now. He thought about the grave in Incheon. He had gone back to it the week after the council meeting, alone. He had stood at the headstone with Nia's name on it, and he had thought about the 21-year-old who had stood there before, and he had thought about everything that had been buried in that ground. Not a body, but time, years, a family that should have existed and didn't. He had thought about all of it until he had felt the full weight of it, and then he had turned and walked away, and he had not gone back. Some things you grieve once, completely, and then you leave in the ground. He had people he trusted now in every position that mattered. He had an organization that knew the full story and had made its choice. He had a daughter who called him Dad on Tuesday mornings when she was thinking about something else. He had a woman beside him who had run for 4 years and had stopped running and had said yes to the ring he bought when he was 21. He was 26 years old. He had, for the first time in his adult life, something that all the power and the fear and the empire and the fearsome reputation had never once given him. He had somewhere to be. He had people who knew his name in the way that mattered, not the name on the files, not the name spoken quietly before a room went still, but the name said plainly, without performance, by someone who looked at his face and saw him. Ji Huan, Dad. The spring light moved through the garden and Amina crouched down to show Pepper the flowers close up. And Nia laughed at something Shin's wife said, and the sound of it was ordinary and real, and the most extraordinary thing he had ever heard. He breathed in. He let it be enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.